what it really excites you about the potential of AI right now in media as you guys are looking at it.
So the way we are thinking about AI and how it's changing what we're doing in media and investment in particular is there's kind of two angles to it. From a back of house perspective, we are already embedding AI into all of our processes internally to help accelerate, to help us move faster, to help us think outside the traditional boundaries and boxes. One that excites me the most is called synthetic audiences. We've been able to build them audiences and audience agents that ingests all the information we know about their consumers and then be able to query against it and say, how do you respond to this type of message versus this type of message? So really kind of cutting edge, leading into what's next in terms of how we use AI to automate both what we do behind the scenes to make us faster, smarter, but then also what we're doing with our clients to accelerate their work.
Hello and welcome once again to the AdTech Heroes podcast. I'm your host, Jon Wallett, and we have an exciting one for everyone today. In today's episodes, we're going to be talking about the human edge of AI in modern media. And I am most delighted to be joined by Liane Nadeau, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Digitas. And Liane is great. Amazing experience, one of my favorite people to converse with. And how are things going with you today?
Things are good. Things are busy as always, but wrapping up summer, heading into the fall. Excited. I was looking at my travel schedule. It's starting to heat up considerably, as it tends to do in the spring and fall. But excited for all that's to come for the rest of the year.
So let's kick things off right away. Obviously, the overarching topic today is AI. We're going to be talking about the human element involved in there and get some of your thoughts on the matter and your experience with there. But here at AdTech Heroes podcast, we like to kick things off with learning more about you. So why don't we just start with what first sparked your interest in advertising and how did you become a Digitas unicorn? Tell us everything.
Yeah, happy to. So when I was an undergraduate, I went to Providence College in Rhode Island, and I was studying finance. And I gravitated towards a space where numbers were kind of at the root of things. I had always come from that kind of left brain background. But what I realized pretty quickly was that numbers without meaning behind them definitely wasn't my passion. I started focusing a little more on economics and then started taking some marketing classes on the side as some electives and really loved this kind of bridge that economics, marketing, and finance all kind of came together in the world of media specifically. And it was a mentor of mine my senior year who said, you might really love media planning and buying because it kind of takes what you love about numbers and the foundation they bring and kind of the black and whiteness of numerical side of things with the creativity you love about marketing. So for me, that's what sparked me to be interested in advertising. It was a leap of faith because as many of us in this industry know, when you're a senior in college and all of your friends in accounting and finance have jobs locked down early, you kind of have to wait it out. And so I spent my senior week interviewing and ended up at an agency here in Boston called Hill Holiday. And I was there for almost 5 years, learning kind of the foundations of media strategy and planning. And I'm so grateful for the time I had there, really getting the foundation and building blocks of everything that is media. And pivoting then into programmatic was what got me over here to Digitas. So I started taking on more on the digital side at Hill Holiday and leaning into what they called the platform team, which was kind of all things biddable, search, social, and programmatic, but really finding a passion for kind of how you take the foundation of media strategy and planning and apply the technology side of ad tech. So that's where that now almost 10 years ago, what brought me over to Digitas to help build what we call the precision team, which is now encompassing programmatic and direct IO. So coming over, working on lots of different accounts, spreading into other channels over time, and now taking on oversight of all of our investment. So that's what got me here. I think it's maybe a less traditional ad tech background coming from the media strategy side of things. But for me, that was kind of the perfect nexus of building the foundations, understanding the infrastructure behind media, and then applying the accelerant of technology to it.
I love that. So in your day to day as the chief investment officer, you're able to flex a lot of that financial experience you discovered in college. And so tell us a little bit more about your current role. Chief investment officer. Um, a lot of people kind of have sense what that means. Like, can you tell us what a typical day for you is like?
That there is such thing as a typical day, and that probably expands beyond my role to many at the agency, but I can say, what the average of the days looks like. So, for me, I oversee a team of about 3 to 400 people that are responsible for, oversight of all of our channels. So, we've got someone in charge of video, we've got a social team, a search team, precision, like I mentioned, and then partnering with our partners at PMX for foundations like out of home and print. So for me, the element of oversight I have is not only on channel expertise, so ensuring that our channel teams have their craft up to speed and are constantly evolving and pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but also we've instituted cross-channel investment leads, people who, like me, have to think about a holistic investment approach across all the different channels on behalf of each of our large clients. So overseeing those two teams, making sure our craft is in check on the channel side, and then making sure that we're bringing kind of new thinking that not only takes advantage of those channels, but really combines them and looks at the intersection of them. So, what I have seen in the past couple of years is that all of the new and exciting opportunities in media don't sit neatly in one channel bucket. And that's what we're working with on our cross channel investment leadership perspective is how do we bring things together and create networked experiences for consumers that don't necessarily sit inside a search role or a programmatic role.
Right. So it's the objective really becomes how do you meet the consumers where they are, no matter, the channel, the opportunity. And I think part of that equation, not just having, you mentioned 304 or 300 to 400 people under your remit, but now the introduction of AI to the equation, right? So part of the conversation today, and it used to be such a buzzworthy word. Now it's just table stakes at this point. But I would love to talk a little bit about how AI is beginning to disrupt a lot of that omni-channel strategy, that approach, and but start with what it really excites you about the potential of AI right now in media as you guys are looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we are thinking about AI and how it's changing what we're doing in media and investment in particular is there's kind of two angles to it. There's like front of house and back of house. From a back of house perspective, we are already embedding AI into all of our processes internally to help accelerate, to help us move faster, to help us think outside the traditional boundaries and boxes. Some examples of that. So here at Digitas, we have a platform called Digitas AI. It was built by our chief systems officer who wanted to put AI in the hands of everyone within the agency, not only to use, but to actually invent and build. So within Digitas AI, yes, there are a number of different platforms and agents that are already pre-built for us to take advantage of. Some are just a safer version of some of those that are publicly available because they're completely firewalled to stay within our network. But some of them are, the ability to do things that we are already doing on the back end, but on a faster, maybe more consistent basis. What it also allows us to do is come in and build our own agents. And I am not a coder. You've heard my background. I don't have any experience in building on the back end of systems and tools, but we've basically been given the toolkit to be able to build agents, to be able to give them an index and understand what you want to train it based off of, to talk about the tonality you want this agent to use. And so on the back end, we're using these on an ongoing basis. There's new agents being built all the time to help, again, enable our processes, enable our thinking. One example of an agent that I think is really, really helpful for us on the investment side is called Vera. And it is a vendor evaluation agent that allows us to ingest RFPs from our partners. So we send out a request for proposal. We obviously receive those RFPs, but to help us synthesize what's at the core of those RFPs, to help us feed not only what we're getting back from the marketplace, but feed our clients' objectives, their budget, their strategy. And then what the agent is allowing us to do is not make decisions for us. We're not at the point to say, you tell me who to buy, but instead to synthesize and help us curate the information that matters most and create a comparison that makes our teams really easily able to see what the opportunities are and how they compare to one another. What that agent also can do is, because it's ingesting all of this information about RFPs, again, within our firewalls, never leaking outside or bringing in outside information, we're able to then go and query that when we have a new campaign coming up for a new client or a new client or a pitch, and say, what are some exciting opportunities in the marketplace now for Black Friday, Cyber Monday? And it's able to spit back to us the information that it's seen from all of those RFPs. And so that's just one example of kind of something we're using on the back end within Digitas to think about how we move faster, move smarter, generate new ideas, and kind of synthesize the way we work. The other way AI is being used is obviously on the front end. And so for consumer facing deliverables, and this is an area where, from an investment perspective, we are not necessarily tapping into generative AI use cases on behalf of our clients. But we are in other areas of the Digitas organization tapping into, consumer facing, or in some case, client facing for us, tools. And one that excites me the most is called synthetic audiences, where we know our clients often are constrained in terms of ability to go out and pre-test creative or understand exactly how something, a tagline or a message, is going to resonate with consumers. And so we've been able to build them audiences and audience agents that ingests all the information we know about their consumers and who they're trying to go out and reach and their growth audiences, and then be able to query against it and say, what are the environments that you're going to for trusted, sources? How do you respond to this type of message versus this type of message? So really kind of cutting edge, bleeding into what's next in terms of how we use AI to automate both, again, what we do behind the scenes to make us faster, smarter, but then also what we're doing with our clients to accelerate what their work.
That's great. I mean, I feel like that's part of the ethos of Digitas, right? You guys have always been on the cutting edge of digital advertising to, from the nascency, from the beginning of it all. And I love what you're describing here, because it sounds like there's still that human element. You mentioned earlier as part of your answer that it wasn't just about AI spitting out, a recommendation, or it's very much, you still have the human touch there, in order to interpret that, in order to, because at the end of the day, your teams know the clients best, right? You know what their intentions are, what their needs are. So this is just to what we always talk about, I think, in the industry, is AI is not going to replace us, but rather enhance what we do. Um, so do you feel like that's the irreplaceable human role in the equation to that decision making, or how do you think the evolution of those tools is going to impact your team, and even client expectations? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not even just the nascency of leveraging AI in new ways that's, requiring us to have a human element on top. I believe we will always need that human element to sit on top. One, because of what we do, right? What we do is, in some ways, based on gut and based on intuition and based on past experience that you can't necessarily train an agent to replicate. But also because we do need to keep kind of the train on the tracks and be the guardrails that sit around the agents, because what they can go and build and do is so unlimited that you need some sort of curation, some sort of kind of guardrails around it. What I think is challenging, and one of the things that probably keeps me up at night is, well, it doesn't. I sleep very well. But if it did, it would be how we train our people differently, how we hire, recruit, and then most importantly, train people differently to be arbiters of these technologies and these agents. One of the things that I think is maybe a misconception is that we don't need to teach our people to calculate a GRP anymore, because they've got plenty of agents and tools that can do that for them. But I actually believe the foundation, the stuff I talked about doing very early on in my career, building flowcharts and calculating reach and frequency, is actually something that we need to train our people more than ever on, because they need to be able to understand when an agent is spitting something back. They need to be the gut check. They need to be able to say, that doesn't make sense. And if we instead focus only on teaching them how to use the agents, we lose that element of kind of guardrail, like I mentioned. So, one of the things that, again, we're spending a lot of time talking about as an executive leadership team here is, how do we think about the task force of the future? It is going to be both humans and agents, but what do we need to do differently with those humans to make sure that they're going to be able to get the most out of agents, but also to sniff test when something isn't right? So that's an area where I think we still, as an industry, as a company, have a lot of work to do in continuing to accelerate again, not only the use of the tools, but the how we evaluate the tools.
Right. So it's, who's watching the watchman kind of thing. And I think that's, credit to you guys because the education piece I think is so important. The why is this happening? I think is just going to empower people and enrich their daily activities, right? So I agree there. I think that that's an angle that, how do I think the way to think about it in my eyes is how do we become less prompt engineers and more remain part of that equation, right? You mentioned synthetic models or synthetic data. I think I remember reading a quote somewhere that said in the next 5 years, is it? There's not going to be enough organic data or content for these large language models to gather. So we're going to be reliant on synthetic data no matter what. So it's interesting to see and hear how you guys are evolving ahead of that trend and executing on that at the agency level. Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit, going back to one of the things you mentioned earlier about cross-channel planning. Can you talk more about how Digitas is approaching that differently heading into 2026, knowing that the year is pretty much almost out?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So at the foundation, Digitas is all about networked experiences, which we believe is kind of the come together of not only multiple media channels, but true paid, earned, shared, owned experiences for consumers that allow them to connect with the brand. We believe that brands still need to make connections with humans, even in the age of all of this technology led by AI. But we need to be able to deliver experiences that don't sit neatly in a silo, don't sit neatly in a channel. I think about a partnership we have with Hershey and Reese's on New Heights, and we see New Heights as obviously a podcast, but most of the viewership is happening on YouTube, but then actually a lot of the reach is happening in cut downs on social. And you think about this, like what would have previously been classified as audio is now it's video, it's social, it's commerce. And so what we need to have is still the rigor behind channel expertise. We still need people who know how to operate the systems, the platforms, and get the most out of our media dollars, but we also need these networked thinkers. And I think what we're doing is really accelerating growth in that area of people who can think about true experiences. Yes, uh, understand how a channel works and needing the rigor there, but really think about what does the consumer see? Because the consumer doesn't see audio versus video versus social. The consumer sees a brand. So it's really imperative that we're creating the opportunity for us to deliver those networked experiences, and that's what Digitas as a full service agency is able to deliver.
Love that. And is that also impacting how you think about structuring teams internally? Like when you go out to the market to find capable people to address that approach, what's the thought process? Like going back to the education, like how do you address that and building out these teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of it is structural, absolutely. So I mentioned we've got craft teams that are focused on, again, building excellence within a certain channel and the activation of those channels. But then it's the structure we have around those cross channel investment folks who are thinking about those networked experiences and not worrying about what channel does it sit in. Is that my budget or someone else's budget? But truly, how do we deliver an experience that's going to resonate with consumers? And it's those two things together that are required. But something else you kind of alluded to that I think is really critical is who. It's yes, the structure, but it's also the people. And I think one of the things I'm looking for in every single interview and every single conversation is curiosity. And I think it's something you can't necessarily teach. You need people who are hungry. Our values as an agency are fearless, inventive, and generous. And I think knowing we are really focused on people who can come in, push the boundaries of what's possible because they share that curiosity about consumers, about the ecosystem. And I think it's critical that we get the right people in the door in order to make the systems work that I mentioned.
That's great. I love that. So, as part of this, we're talking about what we need to learn, what we need to have in order to execute in this new structural format. What would you say marketers, just not just your teams, but what do they need to kind of unlearn about the media buying process, right? Take AI out of the equation, but just talking about this new environment that you're describing, what do you think they have to kind of settle with themselves or unlearn in that process?
It's a really good question. I think when we set out ad tech, programmatic, we got very focused on like lasers and triggers and how do I get to one and reach that right person. And what I think we neglected to also consider is context, is environment, is what else they're experiencing in that moment. And so I don't know that it's necessarily an unlearn because audience is still critical as we think about creating networked experiences across peso. Like I mentioned, we still need to be able to understand who that person is to reach them with the right message in the right moment. But I think it's an and that we need to not just focus on who, we need to focus on where, when, what's the right context, what's the right mindset for that person to be having in order to be most receptive to that message. So it's not saying don't be laser targeted and focused on an audience, but it is saying how do you also consider the other environmental factors that allow you to reach an audience? I think somewhere along the way we conflated addressable media with audience targeted. But if you think back to kind of the early days of media, sometimes to reach moms, you bought, ad insertions in family publications, and that was enough. And so I think we need to balance those two. We need to, yes, be hyper focused on who we need to reach and what's the right message for them, but thinking about where and when they're experiencing that and from whom in some cases, leveraging the power of influence and influencer networks to be able to reach them in a way that is going to resonate for them.
That's great. And I think you're tapping into something that I've thought about and spoken to other people about, which is it's almost as if this new form of AI and these, AI has been around for a long time, but the way that we're executing it on now, it's allowing us to kind of go back to the way that we traditionally thought about context in relationship to how people consume media. And to your point, I think that lends itself to things, like loyalty. I think there's a narrative that's gone on that because we've gotten so targeted, it became more about, efficiencies and just focus on a solo like ROI or ROAS instead of just focusing on what's going to make an impact to the consumer. So, as we kind of switch gears towards the end of our conversation here, I'd love to talk a little bit more about how context and everything you're describing here plays into how you're approaching conversations with clients. And, how are you thinking about things like loyalty and attention as currencies in the mix today? Because, like you said, consumers are engaging with media in varying different ways. But the one resounding thing that I think we could all agree on is context is key to a lot of that relationship with the brand.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. I think, you mentioned loyalty, and I think loyalty is absolutely critical when we think about that kind of pay to earn, share to own ecosystem and think about kind of how we resonate with consumers across all of that. Loyalty is critical. We all grew up with the same marketing books that said, it's a lot cheaper to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. But it also matters because now we're in an ecosphere of influence from others and peer-to-peer influence. So loyalty is more important than ever because you need not only those people to be your advocates, you definitely don't want them to go out and kind of be your detractors. So I think loyalty is critical. What I'd say about context though is we're in a place where I think context has gone from like context 1.0 to context 2.0, and I'll explain what that means. And where I think we're going is how AI can accelerate us into context 3.0. So for me, 1.0 was like, okay, I sell a food product, I want to be in recipes. And it was, there was evolutions of the technology that made us be able to do that better, smarter, faster, and not based on keywords, but not at the domain level, and get a little more curated and focused and tailored in how we could do contextual targeting, but for topics that kind of resonated for a consumer. So it makes sense if you're selling dog food to be in a pet article, and that's 1.0. And brands still need to do that. That absolutely still plays a role. Context 2.0 in my mind is getting to mindset and to how a consumer is actually thinking in that moment. And that could be context in the sense of, we're meeting with partners about technology that allows them, to understand moments of anxiety and then be there with a message that's going to kind of give them some sort of assurance, or be there in moments when consumers are anticipatory for something, be it in the middle of a sports game and, we're at a buzzer beater moment. And understanding not only, when are consumers most receptive to our message, because that's critical, but then being able to go out and buy against those moments. So that was kind of, phase 2. But where I think we're going with like contextual, what I've been calling contextual 3.0, is the ability to do that at scale and for the AI to learn what those moments are and then help inform the next one. So that's where I think, it went from a place of very rudimentary context that makes sense for a brand based on the category they're in, to context that makes sense based on what the consumer's mindset is, to now how do we do that in a way that gets ahead of even the moments that we can be anticipating, that AI is allowing us to do it at scale.
Yeah, and I think you tapped the nerve right there, and especially for us here at CTech, it's an area that we've obviously been investing heavily in, and it conjures back to my childhood when I think about the relationship that I had with brands. I grew up in the age of I guess the '90s, where brands were really kind of shaping a lot of culture, and to your point, I think emotion plays a very important role in how we engage with content. There are platforms that build their entire business model on the ability to emote with consumers and get them to engage. So I agree with you in a very specific way that these models are just getting smarter and smarter, and that's something where I think is the next evolution. And I guess my last question on this topic is really: do you have an example you can share where you've had media context help elevate a specific campaign outcome, or is there any? I don't want to call it case study, but just anecdotally something that you could share that enhances some of this dialogue.
Yeah, that's a really good question. All right. So, one recent example, I would say that's very timely as we talk early September, was for Panera, a couple weeks ago. And we had an insight that, as we understood our audience, they are, like many people, very interested in The Summer I Turned Pretty, which is obviously heading towards its series finale pretty quickly. And the topic of conversation was just starting to become a buzz, this like, Conrad versus Jeremiah happening. I'm not sure if you're a viewer, John. You didn't seem to, neither name seemed to resonate with you. But
I'm writing it down right
you
now.
would be team Conrad, no question. But as we were starting to see some of the conversation really becoming a buzz, we understood that, one of Panera's value propositions is the idea of you pick two. And you pick two is something they've had as a product offering for a long time, where you don't have to choose between the sandwich and the salad. You're able to get both. So we saw this huge opportunity in the context, again, not necessarily the page that we needed to be on context, but the context that consumers were going through of this, are you team Jeremiah or team Conrad? And we were able to, using the power of Influential, which is now a part of Publicis Group, strike a partnership with the actor who plays Conrad and be able to have him go out and create social content for us around You Pick Two and not having to decide. So that might not sound like contextual to you. Call it social, call it video, call it influencer, but it was the opportunity to understand the context that our consumers were in that moment, what they were thinking about, and what was going on in their social feeds, and be present for a moment in a way that showed the value proposition of the brand and fit so organically. And for us, I think those are the types of moments that are context 3.0. How do we understand, identify the moments really quickly as they're happening, and then be able to do quick turn media that allows us to really resonate with what consumers are thinking about.
Yeah, that sounds like it's right in line with what you described earlier about the interconnectivity of all these different channels and relationships to media. So I love that example. Thank you for sharing that. So I think coming out of today's podcast, I have some homework to do. I got to look up the Conrad team. Who's Team Conrad? First off, I love that, and I'll put the summer I got pretty as my viewing list this weekend for sure. But I know we're at the end of the podcast, so thank you so much for being a part of this. And we always finish off with a certain final question. And for this go around, I wanted to ask if you had a superpower in ad tech, what would it be?
It's a great question. My superpower in ad tech would be taking what I think are really complex topics and can become very challenging for marketers to understand, and distilling them down and making them simpler. I think it comes from the place that I mentioned I started, where, learning from building blocks up. I think I pride myself on being able to take those complex conversations and topics and make them more relatable for our clients and our people internally.
Love that. That's a solid superpower. I dig it. Leanne, thank you. This has been awesome per usual. Appreciate you join. Yeah, it's been great. And hopefully in the future we can get to do this again, and hope to see you in Boston soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, John.
Thank you. See you later.